Welcome to our weekly roundtable discussion by Law Enforcement Coaching, where each week we have unscripted conversations on relevant topics for law enforcement and our first responder community. This week, we are joined by the founders of Preston's Pursuit for Acceptance, Chris and Autumn Timmins. This episode, we have insightful conversations about navigating autism and the importance for departments to have proper training and awareness for handling special needs calls. We appreciate you tuning in and hope you find some useful insights and information from these discussions.
Hi, everybody. Welcome, and thank you to whoever's watching this for tuning in again. We are here with special guests. We have a couple special guests, so we're going to kind of go around. We have the familiar faces, which are Chris and myself. We're the founders and CEO of Law Enforcement Coaching, and we have Greg Nottingham, who is our Chief of Staff and also been on many of our roundtables, but we have somebody next to him. Would you like to introduce your lovely guest?
Absolutely. This is my wife, Brenda, of 35 years this year. Got that right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. And Brenda has been in law enforcement for 40 years. Yeah, 40 years. And working in the civilian side of law enforcement for 40 years. So we're glad to have her on with us as well.
And yes, hi Brenda, you're part of our team as well, so thank you for making an appearance and being on here. Give us a little bit of a rundown. I know Greg introduced you, but tell us a little bit about yourself from your voice.
I started in 1984 as a dispatcher and worked 8 years at one location and then moved to another local agency for another 6 years dispatching. And for the last 32 years at the one agency and 26 years doing background investigations.
Thank you. And our other special guests, we have Chris and Autumn Timmins. So please welcome and introduce yourselves.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Autumn Timmins. I am the president and co-founder of Preston's Pursuit for Acceptance. It's a nonprofit 501c3 that we founded about a little over a year ago. It's named after our 18-year-old son, who is on the autism spectrum. We're very proud of our son and all of his amazing accomplishments. He is a freshman in college at ASU Poly. Couldn't be more proud of him. But anyways, we founded this nonprofit with the idea of training first responders to go to calls for service with better tools in their tool belt, going to address neurodivergent individuals, discuss a little bit further.
Yeah, absolutely. So Chris Timmins, I've been in law enforcement since 1999, so 25 years in law enforcement. A good majority of those, over 2 decades, I've been teaching use of force, defensive tactics. And in 2017, there was an incident that occurred where an officer in Arizona went to a call for service, and it was highlighted and captured on body-worn camera, where this officer was trained in drug recognition, trained in DUI investigation, but did not receive any training in dealing with someone that is neurodivergent. And what I ended up seeing, and what Autumn and everybody else that saw the video saw, was that this officer went hands-on and used force on a 14-year-old boy that was overstimulated in a park. And for us, that was a point in 2017 that I considered quitting law enforcement, completely getting out, because I didn't know if I can continue to teach defensive tactics the way that we teach them to young officers, to have them do the same thing, especially to our son in our own community, if that would have happened. And Autumn told me, like, you have a voice, you have an opportunity. And we toyed with the idea. And then last year it came to fruition that we're like, what we need to do is we need to better equip our first responders to treat people the right way and to take care of our first responders so they don't create injuries when they realize that the person that they were interacting with did not have the capabilities to comply because of a neurodivergence. And that is where our heart and our passion is. That's our why.
Mm-hmm. Well, and really too, we're not about just going in and giving this training. We also want to provide resources, because we know that, we have human beings that we're going to these trainings that are, that have families too, that have individuals on the spectrum. They have family members that may need support and that don't know where to turn. And we've lived that. When we received that diagnosis for our son, we received that piece of paper and we didn't know where to turn. We didn't know where to begin. And it was really overwhelming. It was scary. And I remember feeling determination, because I said, this isn't going to define my son. I was going to give him every resource, everything I could to empower my son, to make sure that he was capable in life and he was going to be a success story. And so I want to make sure that every family has that and they have that ability. And so we made sure that we've created this resource list of tools that we can provide to families, that we can provide to our first responders, that they can also take with them to calls for service. Because then when they're going to these calls for service, when families are in need, they're in crisis, they can provide these families these tools, these resources, because they may not always have this information. They may not know what to do, or they're crying for help. So we want to make sure that we're not just providing tools for our first responders, but we're providing support and help. We want to be that next piece as well.
Well, and I absolutely love the group of people that we have for this, because this is it's a very important conversation that needs to be had. And I think collectively we can look at it from all the different angles. Greg and Brenda, I'm going to have you talk a little bit about your experience as well in just a moment. But we bring in the law enforcement side of things, we bring in the family parent side of things, and then just watching from afar of all of the different issues and just seeing like, okay, we got to do better. But where do we start? And part of that is listening to the people that have actually experienced this, especially the parents in law enforcement, because you guys are going to be the quickest way to say, hey, this is the training that we're lacking, and here's the training that we're needing. So before we go into that part of it, I want to get a little bit more of your guys' background so that people understand who you are and why you guys are experts in this field. So Greg and Brenda, I'm going to have you guys talk a little bit about your family.
Well, we have a 38-year-old son who was born with lots of medical issues. And, 38 years ago, we didn't know anything about autism. We didn't know there was no diagnosis of autism. He was diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury because he had brain issues, and he had to have a number of skull surgeries. And so they just called it a traumatic brain injury. And then basically he was learning disabled. He's hearing impaired. He had open heart surgery when he was an infant, and like I said, multiple cranial surgeries because he had problems, water on the brain, hydrocephalic, and so they had to keep going in and opening his ventricles so that his brain could grow, and apparently that they was part of the damage.
The seizures.
Right. He's also seizure prone, and he's had seizures all of his life, and a number of seizures. They've been more controlled now. And over the years, the doctors, like Autumn said, there's nowhere to turn. He's 38 years old, and it wasn't until Preston's Pursuit that we actually got some direction, some resources, some support, some ideas of what we need to do now as parents, which we should have done, 38 years ago, but there was no help. Even the medical field, talking to doctors and the medical professionals, they just with Josh, they just didn't know what to do, or how to do it, or what we should do, or where the help was. And already in this short year of Preston's Pursuit has helped us tremendously on having resources that we can turn to. And from that's more of a personal side. From a professional side, 30 years in law enforcement, we never got any training. There was never any consideration for anybody who had mental health issues or autism issues, and still to this day, with the exception of what you guys are doing with Preston's Pursuit, there's no training. There's no way to get these young officers to know you're going to run into these people. No one ever told you were going to run into these people, and when you did, and they weren't complying, you just, hopefully there was enough common sense that would kick in that would tell you, and maybe because having a special needs son, it gave me more of a perspective on, okay, something's not right here, and it's not drugs and alcohol. Something's not right. Something's not clicking. So maybe I need to back it down a little bit. So maybe from that perspective, or that gave me a little bit more perspective on what's going on and how to handle a situation where you're just not going hands-on because they're not listening and they look like they're out of control. But this is just a vital training that every officer, every firefighter needs to have, and they need to know how to deal with stuff like this and they need to recognize it. They need to recognize it sooner. We need to be able to go on scene, recognize that there's an issue. If it's drugs and alcohol, 9 times out of 10, it's going to show itself. You're going to have other signs, symptoms, evidence that it's drugs or alcohol, and you're going to be able to make that distinction. But you just need to start learning how to deal with people like this, because they are our most vulnerable and precious people in society. And they need to be taken care of.
Well, I'm going to end up crying on all of these. Okay. Whew. And it's true. I personally, I have a very close friend who's like family, that when she had her baby, he was fine until about 6 months. And then he started having seizures and having medical issues. And he was having so many seizures so frequently, just through all of the treatments and everything that was going on. He's now 13, but he is nonverbal, autistic, and he's got a lot of the sensory. He does some of the things like that, the hitting, the hands, and but he's in there, like, he's so sweet and so in there. But an officer coming to it, if they're not trained, they're not going to know what to do. So with Autumn and Chris, a little bit more of your backstory about your son, and then we can kind of move into some more of the training and things that we need to look out for.
Absolutely. So when Preston was adopted at 1 week old, and we got the medical records, we got as much as we could get about him, but everything was amazing about him, right? He had 10 beautiful fingers and 10 beautiful toes, and everything was perfect. And at the time, I was in criminal investigation, so I was missing a lot of the milestones that he should have been achieving that you see that Autumn was able to see. And she started noticing, he was our first child, but she started noticing that he was missing some of these milestones. And I'll let her talk a lot about that, because she's really the force behind, hey, I know that he's not, buttoning his pants the way other little boys are his age. And she's like, and this is not just like mommy and daddy didn't teach him, because mommy did and daddy was there. It was, he's not getting it. And then it was through her persistence that we started seeing that, I'll let you talk about it, but just seeing that there's more that needs to be done. And then, I would go to these calls as a young patrol officer, as a detective, and like Greg said, we didn't receive the training. And the training that I got 25 years ago is the same training that Greg got 38 years ago. That is the same training still today, that it is mental health, and it covers psychosis and drug impaired psychosis and schizophrenia. And it's an 8-hour class, and they throw 40 minutes of autism in there. And every hour you get a break on the hour for 10 minutes. So that 8-hour class is really only a 4-hour class. And what you're getting on autism is 45 minutes. And they're like, go ahead and go. And now we're going to do 2.5 hours of DT right following that. And then we're going to give you a scenario where it's going to be a mental health scenario. And what we really want you to do is to nicely put that person in handcuffs, and then you're done with them. And that's the training that they get. So, but go ahead and tell more about Preston.
Yeah, so I mean, we received Preston. He was a week old, and of course, you just love this human being more than life itself, and you think he's just perfection. And and as he progressed into a toddler, and and beyond, you start realizing that he's not hitting those milestones. And I remember going to a birthday party when he was like 4 or 5 years old, and here we are, and it's like a bounce house and whatnot. And I'm thinking, oh, he's going to run in screaming like the rest of the kids because everybody's so excited to be here and they're happy and they're screaming and, running around. And no, my kid goes in there and he has the look of horror on his face, and he just starts crying, and he's panicked, and he just wants to get out. And, every other kid is happy and thrilled to be there. And mine is terrified. And he's looking for the first exit to get out of this playground area. And I'm thinking, what's happened? What is going on? And it's, ultimately I find out that it's the sensory overload. He's hearing the hyper sounds of, the bounce house, the air blowing in it, and, and everything else. And I have no idea at the moment there that that's what is happening to my child. And, as time goes on, I learn more about, what's different about my child. And then I ultimately go to the doctor and say, I think something's going on. We need to investigate, find out what's going on. We get the initial, first round of testing. I get this mixed bag of diagnoses, and I'm like, what do I do with this? What is this? And they don't tell me what to do with this. They don't give me anything, no direction. So I go to another, doctor, and we ultimately get the diagnosis of autism. So, I'm on this mission. I get, all the therapies, I get all of the, care, I get, everything we can. And, fast forward, and we're doing all the things we can to get him successful. And, here we are, and an incident happens. We start seeing incidents happening, negative interactions with law enforcement, and we see things that could do better. But also being the wife of somebody in law enforcement, I also want success story on that side too. So here I am feeling this pull in both directions because I live both sides of the coin there. I've 22 years married and in law enforcement here, and also the mom of an individual on the spectrum, and it's heartbreaking, and I just want a success story for both. And so hence the reason I just, I felt like instead of, curling up in a ball and crying and saying, oh, this is horrible, I was on a mission to just do better and find a way to find a support system for both. And how can we do better? How can we help? And, what can we do to make a difference? And that's what it was all about for me. How can we do better? Because, I can sit in a corner and complain and scream and yell and say this sucks, but no, that's not going to fix anything. That's not going to make it better. So we're on a mission to do better and to help. And so hence the reason we wanted to create this nonprofit and find a way that we could, to cheer both sides on and to kind of bridge that gap and help and to create these tools and to do this, in the right way, in the best way we can.
Well, and I think that that's really important. I'm all in my feels today. So, but
Sorry.
But it's good. I'm so, it's a needed conversation to have. And I know that we're going to get into some heaviness that we're going to kind of rip on law enforcement for a little bit because it needs to be said, because there are really negative responses. And I know there's a lot of frustrated parents, and I know a lot of frustrated people out there that aren't affiliated with law enforcement, but they are raising autistic kids or on the spectrum or dealing with that, and they are terrified. And the thing is, we're going to have these conversations, but we all have the common goal. The law enforcement side, the parent side, we all want the best We want the solutions. We want the best case. No cop, I will speak on behalf of everybody. No cop is going into these calls wanting to hurt or arrest somebody. They're trying to keep everybody safe. So if you're responding to a call and the information that you have is, they're holding a knife or they're a danger to themselves or to somebody else, and that's the information you have going in, you guys you're going off of, you only know what you know, right? You don't know, hey, they have these issues, they're not going to respond. The little bits that I know that have been part of the conversation and part of the training that's coming is, if you do have the call kick out and you do know that it is a special needs person, sometimes just turning the lights off, turning the sirens, you don't need to come flying in hot, because that's actually going to trigger. So knowing how to just show up to the call, slow down. And that's just for mine. So you guys can absolutely speak on just how do you show up to the call before you even get into it.
Well, before you get into that, I'm sorry, but for an ignorant retired cop like myself, and I've heard you've mentioned this already, on the spectrum, and I hear this all the time, especially when I was active. But what does that mean, being on the spectrum?
So it is. It's called autism spectrum because there is such a variation. You meet one person on the spectrum. You've literally met one person on the spectrum. There's such a variation for them. There's been such a change in the diagnoses over the years. Used to be a reference called Asperger's. They don't reference that anymore. Like our son, he was initially referenced as being Asperger's. They don't call that anymore. They don't reference that anymore. So in the DSM-5, now they reference levels, level 1, level 2, and level 3. And that's what they reference now. But yeah, when they all, so when you meet somebody, one person, like stimming, for example, when somebody is stimming, like our son, when he's stimming, which means they're like dysregulated, for him, he will wave his arm around. It's like he's got a sword in his hands. He's pretending he has a sword in his hands, and this kind of calms him. And he's pretending that he's, waving his sword, and he'll have an outward conversation. And it can be upsetting to somebody that doesn't know who he is, because he's a large man waving a sword around, having an outward conversation. And so it can be upsetting. But for somebody else that could be stimming, it could be like playing with a string, pacing back and forth, maybe not talking to themselves. So they all exhibit differently on how they're stimming. So it is a spectrum of ways on how they exhibit different things. So I hope that explains it.
Yeah, and to elaborate on it a little bit more, the spectrum, right? With the levels, and historically they would say high functioning, low functioning. So low functioning requires a lot of supports, sometimes nonverbal, not able to go to the bathroom. And then it would transition all the way to high functioning, and there was no medium functioning, right? And so high functioning, if you think about it, Dan Aykroyd has Asperger's. And so he would be high functioning autistic if you're using the new diagnoses. He's got a job, he's successful, he's a movie actor, he's witty, he's got a sense of humor. And the thing with autism is it's an invisible disability, right? Until you sit down and engage with that human being and maybe talk to them and spend some time and build a rapport with them, you're not going to know that person has autism if they're on the higher functioning, unlike cerebral palsy or Down syndrome, right? So, and the spectrum is, there's so many different things in different ways. Like with our son, even when Autumn was talking about this, when he was, 3 or 4, he used to do a hand clapping or a hand flapping. And then it progressed now to doing something else. So just because your mannerism or you're overstimulating, or RB, which is restrictive repetitive behavior, changes over time. It's what you do at that moment when you're overstimulated to try and control the situation, because they can't control it through cognitive thought process like somebody else, or even like in law enforcement, when we got taught combat breathing or the 4-7-8 breathing, we're like, oh, this is over stressful. need to take a break, they can't do that. And so these individuals have those RRBs that they have to do to help them get out that energy and get out and try and get control of the situation.
And
All
I
right.
think,
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I think that's really important that we started there, because that also leads into when law enforcement does implement some form of training, you cannot just check a box. It cannot be like, oh, we're doing autism training, because that, unless you're sitting there and it's in depth and you're hitting, because you can't. I have friends that are high functioning where you would never know. They're very successful, but they, wear the same shirt like they have the same color shirt. They wear different shirts, but it's the same shirt because they can control that. They eat the same thing at the same time every day. They're super successful, but you wouldn't know that. And then you have to the other end where, like my friend, where nonverbal is not going to, if they're not able to talk to a police officer or anyone to say, hey, this is my thing that's going on. And if somebody doesn't have any training on that, they're not going to know how to handle that situation. And it's really unfortunate, because then you have reactive just use of force when it was not necessary. And that's what I think we all get pissed off about when we see that happen, because unfortunately it does happen.
Right. Well, and that's why it's important to us, because like we have the example of an incident that occurred a while back that kind of was the pivotal moment for us, where, the young boy was in a park with a string in his hands and he was pacing, and he even verbalized, I have a string and I'm stimming. And he gave some key terms to the officer, but unfortunately that officer, wasn't trained with that. He didn't have the knowledge. He didn't know what stimming is. He didn't know what some of this was. And so, he didn't have that information. That's why we're hoping that we can give more knowledge, more information, better tools for our first responders, so that we can empower them more and hopefully have a better turnout for some of these calls for service, so that we have a better impact, a more positive impact on these. Have them, go to these calls and take pause, ask questions, and so that we can have, a better result.
And I'll bring up real quick. So Canton versus Ohio, 1983, says that law enforcement or municipalities can be held liable for failure to train their employees on situations that they know they should be training them on. And that has always been the benchmark for anything law enforcement related when it comes to a use of force, is a civil rights violation, a 1983 civil rights violation. We know in society every day the numbers are increasing with how many individuals are being diagnosed with autism, but there is no consistent training for that. So they're already opening themselves up for needless liability.
So
yeah, and it's to me that it's a win-win for everybody. It's going to be a win for those people that are on the spectrum and that need the help. And it's going to be a win for the officer and the department, so that they don't go in, and go hands-on and not take the time or had the training to recognize this might be somebody that needs help and not somebody that needs to be thrown to the ground and handcuffed. So it just common sense to me. It's just a win-win all the way around.
Absolutely. Well, and our feeling too is, we're also wanting to bring the knowledge to, dispatch, because, obviously they need to have that knowledge of, what are some good questions to ask the caregiver, family member, whomever, how will they respond? Lights and siren. What are things that they like? Do they like Bluey or what have you? What are things that might, they might respond well to? What might upset them? So that way, when our first responders arrive for that call for service, they can have, more positive interaction right from moment one. And so, or do they like to be touched? Do they not like to be touched? Do they need more space when they're talking? And then that way we can have that right right from the beginning.
So that information, can agencies work with the community that if somebody has somebody in their family that has autism, can they contact their local police department and give them these types of facts or information to dispatch or to the agency? So now, kind of like that address, I don't want to say it's flagged because that's a negative, term, but if a call comes out at a certain address, all that information can come out and that can be relayed to law enforcement. Are there things in place right now out there for that?
Yeah, so Gilbert has that. They have that in place. It's a program called Bring Me Home, and I'll let Chris speak to that.
Yeah, so we call them locations of interest, right? And it doesn't have to be criminal in nature. It's we could get a call for service there, and how can we quickly address that? So the Bring Me Home program, it's all voluntary, it's opt-in, and family members can put whatever disability a dependent or a child has, whether it be Alzheimer's, dementia, whether it be autism and they like to elope, which is running away or just walk away, not running away in the bad sense. Are they attracted to water? Do they sometimes call 911? Are they do they sometimes get overstimulated and go outside and pretend they're playing with swords, or do they are they walking around in the winter during their underwear? So they can put that information on there and get it to our dispatch communication center. And then we're able to have that information to include a photo of them, and it can be an updated photo all the time. And then we know their names, we know their likes, their dislikes. We know things that we can do for instant rapport building. We know sometimes that some people might be close talkers, and so we can tell our officers, hey, this individual really can't hear very well, so they're going to get very close to you to talk, which is counterintuitive to what everything we've learned in law enforcement is, arm's distance away is still not enough distance, right? So we can get that information shared, because if we know what we're going to, then we're better and we're more likely to have a better outcome.
But the key piece is that it's all voluntary. That way the family doesn't feel like they're being forced to share anything that they're not comfortable sharing. And so that's the wonderful piece about it, is they have access to this resource that they can go online, they can go and they can share whatever they're comfortable sharing. And then it's great, because then our first responders have that information, and then they know, it sets everybody up for success.
Chris or Autumn, I have a quick question on the Bring Me Home. Do you guys know if somebody opts in to voluntarily become a part of Bring Me Home or put in information, does that automatically cross-reference to an address? If that address is called in for a call for service, does it automatically link to the Bring Me Home?
Yeah, so it should, as long as they put their address in there. There are people that we have some special needs schools in Gilbert that they don't actually live in Gilbert, but their child goes to school there. So it would even link into the place where they go to school, or they're getting, some treatment or stuff, because if they're at an all-day school and something happens, they know, hey, the address, which, has 400 people at this school, we know that we have this individual, this kid, and it also has a rundown list of emergency contacts. So in our situation, Autumn would be first. If she's not available, then they're going to call me. So it's amazing.
So if they're not a resident of Gilbert, they could still do it, but maybe reference the address of the school?
Yeah, as long as the school or the place where they're receiving services is at in Gilbert.
Okay, beautiful.
Oh, and I've talked to several dispatchers in different locations, and here in Arizona, we have some of the departments utilizing that. On a wider spectrum, there are not resources for some departments. So if you are somebody that works up, they're listening, look into it. The other issue, though, is where the departments need to really work with the community, because it's on the parents to put the information in. It's on the parents to update the information. So if they move, it's going to be the last known address. Having the school in there, I think, is great. But you also, a lot of parents don't know that that's even a thing that's available unless they've had a call. We don't know what we don't know until we've already experienced it, and then we're trying to figure out what to do. So I would put it on, the parents are dealing with enough. I would put it on the department to reach out and start doing community engagement and say, hey, we want to take care of you. We want to get to know you. Let's have some, community nights where we're bringing, whatever that is. And if you have some, at least get the parents there. I'm old school and small town. So like everybody knew everybody. Everybody knew my dad and he knew everybody. So when we had a call, he knew immediately who it was. It's harder when you get into the cities and that's not so much the thing, but there are still the bread and butter of this country are small departments. So the small departments absolutely have it in their power to forge those relationships with the community and know, hey, this is what it is. And there are some amazing videos that do go out. There is body cam where they're like, hey buddy, how, you like Superman today, what's going on? And they handle those calls beautifully. I think that we need to use those and fight the algorithms that shut everything positive in law enforcement down and keep blasting them out, because those good videos are out there. We just need to keep pushing them out and then use those in the department for training of like, hey, this is a great way to handle a call like this, because it's not all negative. But having that awareness. So I want to kind of circle back to where we're going. So going back to just showing up to a call, what are some things that officers could do immediately to start de-escalating and helping the situation?
Well, and I think the first thing is assess the situation as quickly as it can, right? Is the individual a danger to themselves or to others? And if the answer is no to either one of those, then distance and time are your friend, right? And your approach. If you're going to deal with somebody by overstimulating them, using your voice and yelling and screaming at them to stop doing something, if they're not a danger to themselves and they're not a danger to somebody else, it's not needed. It is, hey, bud, how's it going? Hey, young lady, how you doing? My name's Chris. I'm here to help you out. Is there anything I can do to help you? Or just try and slowly engage them in conversations, right? And look at what they're wearing and look at the environment. And, and Greg brought up a good point, is alcohol and drug impairment will separate itself from a neurodivergence, right? There's a potential, and we'll use the winter time in Arizona, that you might be standing outside in your underwear. And initially you could be, is that alcohol and drugs or is that neurodivergence? But the moment you engage them in a conversation, you can start navigating to separate those two paths to which way am I going, right? You ask somebody, hey, I see that you're 38 years old and, oh, you like Spider-Man because you got a Spider-Man undershirt on. That's cool. And they start talking to you, and the way they say things and the way they respond versus somebody that's impaired, you can start to see that. And then you know what? Maybe I can slowly get them to come over to talk to me and I can talk to them and we can take our time, versus someone that's impaired, you're going to see them stumble and fall over and do other things. And then you're going to have to act that differently. And it's, again, just taking in your sight, use our own senses to pick up what we're seeing, right? Alcohol, you're going to smell that potentially. So you just got to take some time. And the other thing is, if there's a caregiver, an adult there, even though the child might be 38 years old, it's okay to talk to their adult mom, to ask them, hey, what's going on? Or ask them, hey, do you have any medical diagnoses or anything that's going on that I can help you or that you might know about this individual? And if they say they're on the spectrum, cool. I know, ask open-ended questions now. I know I need to respond differently to this person, right? Versus, you know what, Mom, he's clearly an adult. I'll talk to you later. I'm going to just deal with that. So
I have a question. So, because I have seen some where you do have somebody who is having an episode and they are angry and they are resisting. They are not necessarily a danger to really like intentionally hurting somebody, but they might be punching a wall. They might be doing something. And I have seen, officers go hands-on and arrest them. And then I see the parent or the caregiver freaking out because taking them to jail is not going to get anybody anywhere. That's not going to help. So what would your suggestion? I mean, maybe you can get the person into cuffs and get them into the car and maybe they'll calm down. It might, I don't know. I mean, what can we do to help train officers in that kind of a situation of taking them to jail is not going to get that. It's just, to me, it's like, no, wrong.
Right.
That's my opinion.
Well, and they're easily influenced, right? Autistic individuals generally become victims of crimes easier than society, 7 times more likely to become a victim of crime than regular neurotypical citizens. So putting them in that jail environment is just potentially opening them up to be victimized. So it is, hey, if I need to immediately cuff the person, right? First thing is I'm going to cuff you until you calm down. And then you calm down, and then you can talk to mom, or you can get your backup partner there, right? And you can start talking and figuring out the situations, and then saying, as soon as you calm down, we'll figure this out, and reassuring them what's going on. And if you're getting information from mom, yeah, it might be a crime, and we get to decide all the time on what we're going to do and not do. But we do get to decide, do we need to arrest this person, or do we need to document what happened in a police report and let the courts decide what they're going to do, right? And again, they might look at this and be like, there's no way that person should have been arrested, or you know what, we're going to court order that individual to maybe go get some therapy or some treatment or whatever. And that's really out of the law enforcement officer's hands. What we're there to do is kind of keep the peace and keep it as safe as possible. And other things that we can do is ask the parent, do they have a provider? Are they seeing any assistance? Do they get any other state assistance? Do they have a crisis worker, something like that they can come out and help diffuse the situation before we integrate them or introduce them into the criminal justice system?
So that kind of brings up a good question here. Do you guys work with, like, are there any specific laws? Because, some DV laws in some states, it's a mandatory arrest if they assault somebody or there's criminal damage that occurred. And so it's kind of out of the hands of the officer. But if the officer knows that this individual might be 30 years old, but they have the mind of a 10-year-old, we all agree here that they don't belong in jail, but the law says somebody's got to go to jail.
Yes.
So how are you guys dealing or navigating that part of it, with legislature and everything? Have you guys looked into any of that?
We've worked a little bit with the county attorney, and we're really trying to address that before we introduce that into the law enforcement world. But every law enforcement agency has their own legal advisor that's going to kind of help navigate through the process. And I think the most important thing is for the officer to document what's called exculpatory evidence. And if mom and dad are like, they're autistic, they're low functioning autism, or they're a level 3, that information needs to go into that police report, but it also needs to go from the officer to the supervisor, that we can start communicating and say, you know what, we do have to still document something happened, but what are the other resources available, right? Do we call out DDD if you have a Department of Developmental or I get that.
Developmental disabilities.
Yeah, developmental disabilities. Or do we call out a crisis response team? Some agencies have their own crisis response team that they have a co-responder with them, that they can come out and they can say, yes, I'm clinically trained, I understand some things, this does meet the element for a crime, but we have this other resource to protect the family, right? Because that's the whole reason that we do the arrest. The arrest is because we need to protect the victims. And there might be another resource that we can have that individual go to, or the family member go to protect them for the night, and then let the case get to the prosecutors to figure it out. It's so new, even though it's been going on for years, just getting people to change their mindset and look at this differently. Just because we arrest them doesn't mean that we are resolved of their safety once they go into custody. And especially if we do know that they have a neurodivergence, we still need to relay that information and protect them. Ultimately, if we did have to make the arrest, one way to get around it, or not to get around it, but to protect the person, is to let the detention staff know this person is neurodivergent. This is a situation. This is why our training needs to go just beyond police and dispatch and firefighters. It needs to go to detention, because they still have that responsibility to protect that individual when they're in custody. So they might have to put them in a different cell, maybe by themselves, maybe in an observation cell, to protect them.
Yeah, well, I mean, that your training should also go up to the county attorneys as well, and even lawmakers, just to make them aware of the difference. So, all right,
we're working on that. We've been in communication with Maricopa County Attorney Rachel Mitchell, so we're working on that.
Well, yeah. And I think having one, because like you said, the training hasn't existed, and it needs you. You guys are doing great stuff. There's a few people across the country that are starting. I think what a lot of the families and departments need to understand is everybody's starting. You got to start somewhere, and at least it's starting. We need to have a lot of more conversations. I think we will be having more conversations on this topic. Having the training, the departments that are listening, it's important that you implement training in some sort and start doing that research. for the families that are listening, not to fear and be like, oh, whatever. Lean into it and protect. Everybody's here to protect. You want to protect your child and your family, go forge a relationship with the PD, with your local authorities, so that part. And then when trainings are happening, I think it would be important to invite some members of the community, especially the parents of whatever mental health, behavioral health issues, so that it's not just, here's, we got some papers, we created a training because we're PhDs and we know everything. It's no, here, this is what the community is asking for. This is what's actually going to be effective. And then again, total team effort, corrections, dispatch, the co-responders. Those are not some extras over here. When it comes to this, departments need to bring them in because they are going to earn everything by showing up to those calls and helping. Every cop that I've talked to is so thankful to have somebody that is trained in mental and behavioral health on those calls. And the the co-responders are also like, we're not going to those calls without real backup. So for community people that are listening, just saying, I got my little 2 cents in there on these things. Total team effort. Well, thank you guys for being on this call. I want to just kind of summarize, and if there's any other little thoughts that we want to put in for this one, I do want to revisit this conversation and do almost an ongoing series because it's very important. But before we wrap it up, Greg and Brenda, do you have anything else you guys want to add?
I'll chime in really quick. Having attended the training myself, it is amazing information. Not only for the officers, but on the civilian side. There's so many positions within a law enforcement agency that could have the potential of dealing with somebody on the spectrum, that it's not just the patrol officers. It's the department-wide, sworn and civilian. And also being the parent of an adult person who was not diagnosed as an infant, with the information that Preston's Pursuit has provided to us in the last year, we have gained so much knowledge, and it's like the light bulb has gone off for us, going, oh my gosh, those are things that we have witnessed with our son over the years, and no physician has ever said, this is what it is. But with the information that Chris and Autumn have through Preston's Pursuit that they've made available to us, it's like, bingo, we see that. So as parents, we have gotten a lot of resources made available to us through Preston's Pursuit, and we greatly appreciate it.
And just as on a professional level, for the police officers out there that are watching this, slow down. You can still go fast, just slow down. Take that second and realize what you're dealing with. Look at everybody wants to go into each call 100 miles an hour. You got 15, high priority calls holding, and everybody's hurry and get through this one, or hurry and resolve this one. Slow down a second. Take the time to realize listen to what dispatch is telling you about this person. Listen to the parents or the family, what they're telling you about this person, and just take that second and slow down. And from a personal perspective, from a parent, if you're a parent of an autistic child or a child that has special needs, get a hold of your local police department. Find out, do they have some kind of a program? And if they don't, tell them to get it. Tell them that they need a program so that you can tag my house, so that if you guys ever have to come here, you know that we've got a special needs son, and you're going to need to deal with him differently. When Josh gets overstimulated, usually what happens to him is he goes into a seizure, and he's not going to understand a police yelling at him, or an officer yelling at him, or orders. He's just going to shut down, and if he gets overstimulated, then he's going to go into a seizure, and we've seen that happen. So it's on the parents too. You need to do your work to make sure that your child is going to be safe.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, we just really appreciate you guys giving us the platform to share about our nonprofit and the work that we're trying to do, because it really means a lot to us. It's very personal, and but we also feel like we're hoping that we can make a difference in supporting our first responders, but also, the neurodivergent community, and, just really making a difference out there. And, we really appreciate the support, you guys.
Yeah, we love hearing, Brenda and Greg, that, we've been able to help you guys. It's a great feeling. It's not a feeling like, it's a feeling like we're helping people, right? That's the whole mission. That's the why. And the other thing is, for the families that are out there that aren't in law enforcement or aren't a firefighter, but they have somebody with a disability, take the moment to script the important things that you need to know, or that you think a dispatcher needs to know before you call 911. Write it down. And it doesn't matter if they cut themselves or they fell. We'll deal with that emergency when we get there. That's what we're trained for. It is what is going on that we can do to help them while we're dealing with that emergency. They're neurodivergent. They have hypo pain tolerance or hyper pain tolerance. These are the medicines they take. This is where they might go. Have that stuff scripted, so when you call 911, that dispatcher is getting that information to the appropriate first responder, police or fire. So when we show up, we're already with the trainings and everything that's going on. We're going to give top-notch service.
I have another question on that one. Does this exist? When you guys run a license plate, will that pop anything up? Does that exist yet?
We're working on that.
I would think for a routine traffic stop, but a car accident, it would be good to, with the license plate, it just immediately, hey, there might be somebody on the spectrum in this car. Let's do better technology. We got companies that can do it.
Yeah, so there's like a bumper sticker. There's a sticker out there that you can put on your car that says, there's a person in the car that's, autistic, but you got somebody like our son who doesn't want that scarlet letter on the car. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want to stick out like that. And I'm sure there's plenty of others. I mean, some people feel comfortable doing that, and there's no judgment on that. But our kiddo, he doesn't want that. And so we are working on that, so that you don't have to. Yes.
Sorry. Well, no, and not a bumper sticker is advertising. I know with everything that's happened with law enforcement, you put a back the blue sticker and your car is going to get vandalized because people see it as a target. So it needs to be it needs to be linked to the license plate, not for the public, but on, for first responders to know.
Yes.
Again, I got opinions.
Yeah, agreed. And so it is something that Chris has been working on, and we're hoping to be getting some leeway, but yes, it has been on our radar, and it is something that means a lot. So yes.
Yeah, we met with MVD and some representatives and some senators, and we're really trying to push it through. We want to push it through as its own bill or its own initiative, so it doesn't get tied to anything, right? Because that's the most important part, is it needs to stand alone to serve the ones that it's designed to serve, the community and the first responders.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's public safety, and what you guys are doing through your own experience of living this every single day, which I commend you guys for putting this together. I mean, Brenda and Greg, you guys were operating 37 years or right around there without really kind of just doing your own thing until you found Chris and Autumn, and then all of a sudden they're giving you this wealth of knowledge. Just in the less than an hour of meeting with you guys, I've learned so much about autism that I didn't know. But what it comes down to is public safety and protecting innocent people. And somebody with autism, though they might be behaving a certain way, they're not suspects. They need help. And so in today's world, our number one priority in public safety is preservation of life, right? This is why we do this.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, in today's world, police officers are held accountable for everything that they do. It's never been like this in history, but the level of accountability today is so high because there's cameras everywhere. Well, not me, but you guys wear cameras, body cams. So everything is being documented. And if you make the wrong decision because you went too fast, didn't recognize in this case, autism, and you end up injuring somebody or, God forbid, taking somebody's life, you're going to be held accountable for it. And these officers need to be aware of this. And the accountability isn't just you're going to get fired. The accountability is one, a loss of life, an innocent life. And then number two, you could lose your freedom. You know, even though you're a police officer, you can go to prison for making the wrong mistake. And I can go over podcasts that I've listened to recently where just that happened. Some mental illness was involved. Officers acted lethally, and now officers are sitting in prison for that, right? Because things happen so quick. So what you guys are doing, you're up in the level of one, professionalism for our first responders, right? Because you're creating that self-awareness, that training for them. But also, two, you're protecting the public, which is number one, but you're also saving departments from getting sued civilly, right? How many millions of dollars are agencies across the nation paying out every day because of mistakes that officers made, mistakes that could have been avoided had these officers been trained properly? So any department that's listening right now, any department out there who does not want to take your training, they're insane for not wanting to do that, right? Public safety is number one. This is why we do what we do. And like you said, that is your why. You want to protect innocent people. So thank you. Thank you guys for sharing. And again, I've learned so much, and it's not even in an hour. This time went by so fast. And Chris, since you're a DT instructor, because I know, you know, those officers out there that are very tactical, I want to get, next time we have you on, I want to pick your brain. How do you respond to these calls while maintaining a tactical safety, but also being able to communicate with somebody, right?
Right.
I see what you're doing. You're meshing the two, which is outstanding. So next time we'll talk about that.
We're absolutely going to have more conversations. But I want to honor everybody's time. For those that tuned into this, stay tuned because I'm going to put all of their contact information at the end of this video so you can reach out to them directly, get more information, bring them on for training. And, you know, just if you're a parent and you're like, hey, I don't really know what to do or how do I reach out to my local law enforcement? I'm a little intimidated by that. We'll all help you with that because cops are actually not intimidating. We're all, you know, guys are pretty nice people. Unless you're a bad guy. So, you know, whatever. So awesome. Thank you all for being here. And until next week, thank you.
Thank you.